Everybody? Everybody can hear me? Good morning. Why don't we get started? Is that okay? I know with communion service it takes a little while for everybody to get down here and get settled. So I once again thought that the prayer of the day kind of fits well today for an opening prayer. It's talk about being anxious. I imagine those early churches in our synod, and maybe even some today with the vacancy rate we have, being anxious, and then maybe even being anxious about taking the big step of starting a school and a seminary and things like that. And yet we put it in the Lord's hands, as the prayer says today. So we'll use that prayer of the day again. O God, you have told us not to be anxious about what we need for this life. Move our hearts to seek you and your kingdom, that all good things may be given to us as well. Through your Son, Jesus Christ our Lord, who lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. All righty. So today, and the way we're going to work kind of through these 6 lessons, today lesson 2, it'll be kind of topical, but we'll also be sort of moving the story ahead as well. So today we're going to talk about the lack of pastors, and then how the Wisconsin Synod is going to respond to that lack of pastors. And just to get us thinking a little bit, one of the things that I think it maybe dawns on people once in a while, particularly when you find out that the Missouri Synod is only 3 years older than the Wisconsin Synod. Why is the Missouri Synod, humanly speaking, finally it's the Holy Spirit's work, right? He works where and when it pleases him in those who hear the gospel. But why, humanly speaking, what factors might we point to that they start just 3 years earlier than us, but end up 5 times bigger than we are? And in fact, even as early as a quarter century in, you can see some stats there, by the time the Missouri Synod's 25 years old, they had 415 pastors serving 523 congregations, and those congregations were spread out almost across the United States by then. Whereas the Wisconsin Synod, just in the state of Wisconsin, had 64 pastors and 119 congregations when it was 25 years old. And you kind of wonder, what in the world? Any guesses? I'll start there.
C.F.W. Walther.
C.F.W. Walther is actually is one factor for sure. They had much stronger leadership. He was a supremely gifted administrator, plus he had confessional Lutheranism right from the start. You know, the Wisconsin Synod, as we'll talk especially about next week, was sort of not sure what they were for a while. He talked about it a little bit last week. Do we like Reformed? Do we like Lutheran? We lean Lutheran, but we kind of tolerate Reformed or want to serve. There's confusion. So that's a big deal, that you have a guy like C.F.W. Walther as your leader, supremely gifted, charismatic, excellent preacher, and confessionally Lutheran. Any other ideas, maybe? Please, Mary.
I was thinking just where they were located. St. Louis was a more important place than Milwaukee.
Location is something, I'm going to expand, Mary, on what you said. She said St. Louis, which is more centrally located perhaps than Milwaukee, but even more than that, the Missouri Synod didn't just start in St. Louis. The Missouri Synod, actually the impetus for starting the Missouri Synod actually came from a bunch of guys who were serving in Indiana and Ohio, plus there was a group in Michigan, and there was, I think, a pastor from New York and Baltimore as well, who were all part of the, and then a few visited from Wisconsin. So they started out with, we started out with maybe, you could say 3 to 5 pastors serving 8 or 9 congregations, all in the Milwaukee area. They started with 12 pastors serving 14 congregations in 5 or 6 states, and quickly, the next year, they already added a bunch more in Wisconsin and others in Indiana and Ohio and Michigan. I mean, they just had a broader and larger beginning than we did. And so they have many more jumping off points to expand quicker. So that's another big factor. Any guesses as to maybe why there's another one we could point to?
Because they focused on more urban areas rather than focusing on more urban areas than rural areas.
Yeah. That is another key factor. Missouri Synod got into the cities. She said urban more than rural. They got into the cities right away. And again, the only city in Wisconsin is Milwaukee pretty much at this time. They were going into many more cities much quicker. I mean, they had churches in New Orleans by the time they were less than 25 years in. They were out in California by the early 1870s as well. So, I mean, again, just the spread and into the cities was a big thing. There's one more key factor.
A lot of them came from Germany for this very purpose.
Another good one. Yep, he said they came to Germany for this very purpose, and a lot of the guys who were coming over right away were university trained. So they already had, again, a bunch of gifted pastors who were very well trained. And that leads into the final thing that they had going for them that the Wisconsin Synod did not. They had not one, but 2 seminaries that were already functioning and operating even before their synod was formed. So they got two places. One eventually became in St. Louis. In fact, this is a picture. Oh, I forgot the This Week in Wells history. I'm sorry. Oh, and today's a great day for church history. Oh, I blew that. Oh my. Actually, earlier this week was the anniversary of the dedication of the Wauwatosa Seminary of our synod, which we're going to talk about today. Today was the beginning of, on this day, the beginning of secondary education in the in the Milwaukee area. We could say that today is the birthday of Wisconsin Lutheran High School. Happy birthday, Wisco. Because it was founded initially in 1903. It was called the Lutheran High School. It was supported by Wisconsin Synod and Missouri Synod pastors. A number of Wisconsin Synod pastors were very active in its founding, including future President John W. O'Brenner. And it remained as that one high school down on 13th and Vine. It was the seminary had used the building at one time in that property. Until the mid-50s, when they split to Missouri and Wisconsin Synod, Missourians, the Missouri congregations supporting Milwaukee Lutheran High School, and then eventually Martin Luther High School on the south side, and the Wells churches supporting Wisconsin Lutheran High School, and getting that new campus built by 1959. So, happy birthday, Wisco. Back to the story here. Concordia, their log cabin, they call it the Log Cabin College. It was down in Altenburg, Missouri, which was down south along the Missouri River, about an hour. Today would be about an hour and a half south of St. Louis. And in fact, that original log cabin, this tells you how much the Missouri Synod is like more in tune with their history, a little bit more than maybe we are. They still have it, and it's there. You can see it. They got a covering over it to protect it, but the Log Cabin College is still there. And they even have a replica of it on the campus of their St. Louis Seminary, the Concordia Seminary in St. Louis. So they have actually a replica of it on the campus. They have 2 of them, I guess you could say. So they had just that advantage. And that's something that the Wisconsin Synod is struggling with right out of the chute. When you look at the statistics of the growth of the Wisconsin Synod, sorry, I guess my thing's cut off a little bit there, but you can see the challenges, especially when you get down to like 1860. We got 59 preaching places, but only 20 pastors. That makes it hard. And because all these immigrants have been coming in, there are so many opportunities, and we just don't have the pastors. And some options that they floated and tried, well, one was mentoring. Okay, we have a guy who might have the gifts, let's assign him to a pastor to mentor him. What might be a challenge of that, though? Why might that be? What challenges come with that kind of concept? Like
Extra work for the pastor.
Extra work for the pastor.
Clarity.
Sometimes clarity, because it hinges on how doctrinally correct and adept the pastor is. And it's not really efficient either. It's going to take a long time. You can only do one, it's a one-on-one thing, not really efficient. Another option was, let's go and use, where's my other thing here? Let's go and use the German mission societies. Well, we talked last week, there's doctrinal issues there maybe. There's perhaps Not how many are we going to get?
I was gonna say lack of uniformity.
Uniformity, right, from different, because you're getting different, and it all different mission houses, and it all depended on who was in charge of that mission house, was how, depending on how confessional the guys were going to be and how well trained they were. One idea was, let's talk about maybe another seminary that was already operating in America. They tried that with one guy, named John Henry Seeker. He was the first Wisconsin Synod born and bred pastor. They sent him to Gettysburg. The problem the problem they discovered was Gettysburg wasn't necessarily as concerned about training guys to work in German, and we kind of needed them to learn, know and work in German. Plus Gettysburg, there were some doctrinal concerns. And also, if our Wisconsin boys go back to Pennsylvania, will they really want to come back to the frontier areas of Wisconsin? So that this lack of pastors early on is just a challenge. Some were incompetent, some were just poorly trained. There were moral problems with some of them. Some of them, again, the doctrinal integrity was lacking because, again, there's not consistent training. I'm just going to use one example real quickly. I'm sorry, I kind of moved back and forth here a little bit in my notes. I get excited about some of these things. So I got to tell the story of this guy, Ludwig Nietmann. He kind of is an example of the challenges with some of these guys who come into the Synod. So here's a guy, he comes over with his family from Germany. They first arrive in Buffalo. And he actually gets a little bit of training from the Buffalo Synod seminary or school that they had in Buffalo. And his daughter gets baptized by the founder of the Buffalo Synod. But he gets into some trouble. He gets arrested and accused of being a Schweinedieb, a pig thief. And it seems that before he could face trial, or at least before he could face the consequences of his actions, he hightails it with his family to Milwaukee. Again, you kind of remove yourself from the problem. And while he's there, of course, people in Milwaukee don't know what happened to him. And so he ends up becoming connected with St. John's on 68th, what's now 68th and Forest Home. And here's a guy, he's got some training, he's got some education. Let's start him out as a teacher. So they had a school, and he starts teaching in the school. 1858 or so, the pastor there retires, and they say, we need a pastor, we're desperate times call for desperate measures. This guy's got some training, he seems to work well with the kids, he can talk to people, he can public speaker. So they petition the Synod to say, can we have him be our pastor? And the Synod reluctantly agrees, as long as he gets his sermons reviewed by some other guy, things like that. Shortly after that, a couple years later, he takes a call up to St. John's in Newtonburg, up near Manitowoc. That's when his past catches up to him. Because at the I think it was 61 or 62 convention, he is forced to write, there's the letter itself, to write and sign and read the document there, that letter, admitting his crimes, his sins, resigning from his call, resigning from the Synod, and promising that he'll never try to pass himself off as a Lutheran pastor ever again. Well, he didn't keep the last promise because he wormed his way into some congregations, first in the Oconomowoc area, and congregations that weren't affiliated with the Wisconsin Synod. So he kept that part of the promise. He stayed out of the Wisconsin Synod. He becomes part there, and then he ends up in Kewaunee, Wisconsin. This would have been, that building there on the left would have been the church that he would have been serving, and now it's some other building. But Emmanuel Lutheran up in Kewaunee. Again, it wasn't a Wisconsin Synod church yet, so he's part of this, he's like pastoring this church. And he's pretty charismatic, and he starts doing, he tries to start his own synod. He participates in rituals at the Masonic Lodge. He is preaching in the local Methodist and Reformed churches, And then he's also meddling in local Wisconsin Synod churches, like the church in Algoma. And it's not until about 1870 that the people in Kewanee finally have their eyes open to what's going on here, and they end up, I think it's actually later, it's like 1875, 76, something like that. They end up giving him the boot. He ends up down in Sheboygan or something like that. And in fact, Emmanuel gets a new pastor right out of the seminary by the name of August Pieper. That name will come up later. August Pieper eventually is a long-time Wisconsin Synod Seminary professor. So he comes in as a young pastor, straightens the mess out, gets Emmanuel to come into the Wisconsin Synod, and Emmanuel Kewanee is a Wisconsin Synod church to this day. Here's an interesting part of this story, though. Ludwig Nietman had a daughter who married a local Kewanee guy, and they stayed in the Kewanee area. They had a daughter named Lydia, and she married a local farmer named Otto Stibbs, or Steebs. Lydia and Otto had 13 children. One of them, Edna, married a young pastor who graduated in 1934 by the name of Rudolph Otto. Those are my grandparents. So my three great-grandfathers, Nietman is my three great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. He was a pig thief. Okay. Another pastor, a son, Arden, became a Wisconsin Synod pastor, and his son and grandson, and now would have been great-grandson, just graduated from the seminary this last year, Jacob Kieselhorst. And this guy was, I think he was like an electrician or plumber or contract, something like that, carpenter. But he had two sons who were pastors, Bill Steebs, and Ralph. So from this guy who was a pig thief and questionable pastor come a lot of Wisconsin Synod Wells pastors to this day, and teachers and called workers and faithful members. Like Kewanee, you go up to the church there, it's full of, they pronounce it Stibbs or Steebs now, full of Steebs people yet, or family members. So just an interesting, God's surprising grace, right? So anyway, how are we going to solve this problem now in the Wisconsin Synod that we've got this shortage of pastors? I mentioned Seeker there, and he goes to Gettysburg. But in 1860, when Johannes Badin becomes the Synod president, so Mühlhäuser served as Synod president for 10 years. Now we have Johannes Badin. And Badin puts on the top of the Synod agenda, we got to start our own school. For 3 straight Synod conventions, he keeps bringing this up. 1861, the Synod said, it's too expensive, we can't afford this. Let's entrust to the folks out in Pennsylvania to help us out. 1862, he brings it back again, and they're getting a little closer. He's clearly been talking to people because they seem to think, okay, maybe, but still can't pull the trigger. You know what's going on in the early 1860s, of course. Civil War, there's those concerns too. He's persistent, though. In fact, this is what he said at the 62 convention. We must dig a well in our country, in our synod, that will supply the workers. I think that's just a glorious statement. We've got to have our own source that we can control as far as what is being taught. So it's kind of starting to see a shift toward a more concern about confessional Lutheranism, but that will have a steady supply, too, that we can count on. And finally, in 1863, the Synod said, yes, let's do it. But now the question is, where? And the choices were Milwaukee or Watertown. Watertown was where Badin was serving as pastor at St. Mark's in Watertown. You might remember Mühlhäuser, who's still alive, is serving at Grace. What do you think might have been some of the arguments for each of those? Like say, let's start with Milwaukee. What do you think might have been the arguments for, let's have the seminary in Milwaukee?
It's like the one city in Wisconsin.
It's the one city of any size, right? And there's some maybe perceived advantages to that. These seminary students will be able to enjoy some of the culture that a bigger city might have. There was also the perception that big city equals better preachers at the churches. Now, I think Boding would have disputed that, but and maybe some others would have, but that's kind of the perception. Bigger church, bigger churches in the city, better preachers, the guys can learn from that. What about Watertown? Why do you think maybe would have been some of the arguments for Watertown? Fewer distractions, particularly the evils that can come from big city life, like bars. Now, of course, if you've ever been to Watertown, I think one time it got voted the most number of bars per capita. But anyway, that was the argumentation. Maybe another one, in favor of Milwaukee might have been more churches. It's the center of the synod. Watertown, though, is, Wisconsin, more congregations were starting in those rural areas, so maybe that's more centrally located. There are those arguments. When it was finally came down to it, the vote was like 45-17 in favor of Watertown. I think a big reason, when the president's in Watertown, that carries some weight. And the farmers in Watertown, in and around Watertown, promised to support it, not only financially but also with food, things like that. So they're gonna start it in Watertown, and way up, and this is a bird's eye view of Watertown, and the college is right there. It's going to be right there eventually. So on this little map, you can see actually the school. In the book, they did a nice job with the graphics. They kind of highlighted it and pulled it out. So it's a picture of this in the book. Starts out with a house, rented house. That house is still there today on 4th Street in Watertown. And the guy who's going to start being the first professor, Edward Moldenke, he had come from one of the German mission societies, sent over, funded by them as one of those traveling preachers, Reiseprediger they called him. But he also had a university education. He actually had a doctor of theology. Perfect guy for this, right? So he's going to start out. He starts out with one student. He flunks him out because Moldenke had, I think, higher standards maybe, or maybe unrealistic standards. But another student replaced him pretty quickly, and then within a year they got 8, 9 students. Obviously can't fit them all in the house, so right away they're trying to figure, okay, we need a building, and they figured out we need a feeder school. We need something on the lower levels to feed it. And so and here's the plaque. That plaque is actually on that house in Watertown. Not entirely, open in this house. Northwestern College, technically, it would have been the Synod Seminary. The college actually begins in 1865 when they build that building. That was the first building of Northwestern College. They called it they nicknamed it the Kaffeemühle. The coffee mill looks like a coffee grinder kind of thing with the cupola on the top. That was the building that did everything. Dorms, cafeteria, classrooms, you name it. I don't know if they had a student union there or what, but the first president of Northwestern, and I should mention too, they open the seminary and then they tell Boding goes over, spends the next 18 months in Germany raising funds for the college, for the seminary college, getting this building funded. So he's going to and he's so successful that's why he stays over there 18 months. He goes as far as like St. Petersburg, Russia, because he's got connections all over the place over there in Germany raising money. This is the first issue of the first periodical of the Wisconsin Synod called the Gemeindeblatt. It was the German version of what's Forward in Christ today. That Forward in Christ or Northwestern Lutheran will be started later as the English one, but this is the German one. And the first issue coincided with the dedication of that building in Watertown. The first president was a guy named Adam Martin. Very un-German-like name. Adam Martin also came from the East, trained in the East at an Eastern Lutheran Seminary, New York. He comes, though, with a different vision. There's kind of like an identity problem here initially with Northwestern. He wants it to be the Harvard of the West. It's not what the Wisconsin Synod needed from this school. It needed this school to produce men and train up kids who are going to think about being a pastor. That's what they needed, but he had his thoughts. And that's why he's not going to be president real long. There'll be some other issues too. Moldenke, as the seminary professor, only lasts 3 years because the Wisconsin Synod feels that one guy is not enough to handle things, because he was kind of like, he and Adam Martin were like the whole show. And so they called to be a second theology professor a guy named Adolf Heinecke. Heinecke had just come into the Synod a few years earlier and was serving as pastor at Emmanuel in Farmington, which is a little community just outside of Watertown near, today it's like Johnson Creek area. He also had a university training. He had a doctorate in theology. He had trained at University of Halle. And as we'll talk about next week, the other great thing about Heinecke is he had a love and appreciation and knowledge of Orthodox Lutheranism, the Lutheran confessions, the Lutheran church fathers, all this. And so he starts teaching and now becomes the, I guess you could say, the president of the seminary as well. And so the seminary, we got this thing off and running. The college part of it, I should also mention, so that lasts until 1869 when we'll talk about this a little more next week. We end up with a relationship with the Missouri Synod, getting fellowship with them. And one of the decisions was to have our seminary training moved to St. Louis. And so for about 8-9 years, we will be training our pastors for their seminary work at Concordia in St. Louis. And a number of our best theologians actually got their training there. John Kaler, son of Philip Kaler, we saw his picture last week, and the Pieper brothers. August, we mentioned him earlier, his brother Franz Pieper, who will be president of the Concordia Seminary and president of their synod for a while, and then Reinhold Pieper, the guy at the top right, who was eventually, he was pastor in Wrightstown, he was pastor actually at First German in Manitowoc, and eventually he ended up as professor and president of their seminary in Springfield, Illinois. Their Fort Wayne seminary eventually moved to Springfield. All from one family. One Wisconsin Synod family whose mother had moved here after her husband died, had brought them all to America, settled around Watertown, and their kids all went to Northwestern, and then the boys went to St. Louis, and they all three sons from one family become presidents of seminaries. Remarkable family. Related to them now, or descendants of that family now, are still in the Wisconsin Synod, including the Jeske. The Jeske family traces their roots back to the Piepers as well. So there's a nice little vignette in the book about this, about the Piepers. So at the college, again, the Lord provided the right guy at the right time. The guy in the middle front row, his name is August Ernst. He comes into the Synod in the late 1860s, gets called to the college, and gets called to be president in 1871. He will serve as the Northwestern president from 1871 to 1919. And then he will be succeeded by two other guys, E.E. Kowalski, who will serve from 1919 to 1957, or 1959, and then Carlton Toppy, from 1959 to 1987. So if you're doing the math, that's 116, 17 years with 3 presidents. That kind of continuity really helped Northwestern to develop its identity, its focus, here's what we are, here's who we are. We're about training pastors or preparing men from the prep school level all the way through the college and then sending them off to the seminary. Helped foster that. And these guys were all gifted too. They were gifted as theologians as well, and leaders, able administrators. Again, the Lord providing the right people. So that gets our ministerial education system off the ground. Meanwhile, because there's more we have to talk about here, other schools we need to figure out. Where do we get them from? Meanwhile, in Minnesota and Michigan, our neighboring states, had similar history when it came to their founding. Similar challenges. Their beginnings were each a little bit different. In Michigan, a guy named Friedrich Schmid had arrived in Michigan already in 1833. So that's 17 years before the Wisconsin Synod gets started. He arrives there. Michigan isn't even a state yet. but he came at the request of some German Lutheran folks, and he came trained by the Basel Mission Society. He comes over and starts traveling all over Michigan, starting churches. In fact, the oldest Lutheran church in the state of Michigan, he founded, Salem in Ann Arbor. It is still a Wisconsin Synod church today. He tried to start a synod in the 1840s. It fell apart, but he eventually gets one going in 1860. The Michigan Synod gets founded in 1860. They also have the same problem, not enough pastors. Takes a while for them to sort out their doctrinal situation as well. This guy, affectionately known as Father Heyer, Johann Christian Friedrich Heyer, I think that was his full name, but everybody called him Father Heyer. He has a fascinating story. He was actually the first, so his beginnings go back to the East again, Pennsylvania in particular. He starts a bunch of churches in the Pittsburgh area. In fact, there's First Lutheran Church in Pittsburgh, and it's the oldest church in Pittsburgh. He started. He also then was the first Lutheran pastor from America sent to a foreign mission field. He spent well over a decade in India. Comes back, though, in the late 1850s, and they send him to Minnesota. Because there were a bunch of Lutherans there, both English Lutherans and a few other, even Scandinavians and some Germans. And he gets there, and this guy is just a remarkable man. I mean, knew so many languages. He knew well in English and German and these Indian dialects, all that. He gets a synod going in Minnesota, the Minnesota Synod in 1860. Similar challenges, lack of pastors, doctrine kind of has to be sorted out. Next generation of leaders, Minnesota Synod finally figures that, we should start we need to start a school to train our own pastors. The guy on the left there is C.J. Albrecht. Lynn would know him. I always forget how exactly the relation goes, but father's brother there of Lynn Kozlowski, C.J. Albrecht. He comes as he's the pastor at St. Paul's New Ulm, which had just in the early 1880s, their church had been destroyed by a tornado, and they were building their which still their sanctuary today. He gets elected as the synod president, and right away there's talk, we want to start a seminary college, a ministerial training school. And again, the decision where to have it. There were some who said, well, it should obviously be in the Twin Cities. It's where most of our churches are. Oh, but when the president is at his place. And the folks in New Ulm were really excited about this idea. They even were promising, thousands of dollars for this. Well, they made the decision in 1883, we'll do it in New Ulm, but let's just wait one more convention so we can talk about it and think about it a little bit more. Well, the people in New Ulm were so excited about it that when they came to the 1884 convention, what should they find in New Ulm but up on the hill, a building going up already? And sure enough, Old Main. This is kind of a cool picture because you see Old Main over here. Unfortunately, it got cut off a little bit on the right, but way on the right is actually Herman the German statue, which is still there today too. And the road going up there, I forget the name of the road. Center Street? Center Street, yeah, going up there. So there's a little closer up of Old Main, still used on the New Ulm campus today. So we got a school in New Ulm. Over in Michigan, new leaders who have taken over for Friedrich Schmid. Eberhard is on the left and Klingman on the right. Eberhard is the president in the 1880s and is pastor at St. Paul's in Saginaw. And they say, we need to start a school here in Michigan too. And their first option, actually the first place for a couple of years, was at a house that a member donated in Manchester, Michigan, which I think is down near the Ann Arbor area, if I'm not mistaken. But we need something more permanent. We need to build an actual structure. Again, debate, Detroit area or Saginaw. Well, guess what? When the president is in Saginaw. Plus, he sweetened the deal. He donated the land. And so they get their Old Main at Michigan Lutheran Seminary in 1887. Now, in the early 1890s, Michigan, Minnesota, and Wisconsin synods started to say, you know, we're kind of close to each other. We have similar histories. We have similar interests. Maybe we should try to do some things together, work together. So in 1892, they formed what was called the Federation. If you want the long name, the Joint Evangelical Lutheran Church of Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, and other states. I don't know what the acronym would have been in German. I mean, it was all in German at this time yet. And they're each retaining yet their independence. They're each retaining their own leadership. They're each going to retain their own home mission work. But they're going to work together in 3 areas. One is going to be publishing, and the Northwestern Publishing House gets founded. Had just gotten founded a year ago, and now that becomes the publishing house for this federation. This federation will eventually become formally merged in 1917, where it all comes together and we form districts, and that's what we have today. They also said we're going to work in foreign heathen missions. We'll talk about that in a couple of weeks. The Apache mission will get started because of this. Then let's work together in ministerial education. Let's do this more efficiently. And so the decision was, let's say the college in Watertown will be a prep school plus pre-seminary training. This is going to all start to sound familiar. Yes?
Now, is the training in German? Are the churches doing everything in German?
At this point, everything's in German.
Okay.
Yep, training's in German, worship's in German. The people would have started to know English more and more, but almost exclusively church work. All the synod reports are all in German. Education at the schools would have been primarily German, almost all German. They would have given them a little English, especially as you get it further into the early 1900s, but for the most part, it's all German. Yep, all German. So we got Northwestern, prep school plus pastor training, pre-seminary training. The New Ulm School will become the normal school. Those of you who maybe know that, the teacher training school. So it's still going to have a high school department, but then this is where we're going to train our teachers. And that tells you something also, that by now there's a need for that. We've got a lot of churches that are operating a Lutheran school. The Michigan folks are going to get just a prep school. We'll see in a second, they're not going to be totally happy about that, but some of them. And then at that first meeting in 1892, they actually had the first federation meeting was at St. John's on 8th and Valete, in that very building that's still there today. They all went out to 60th and Lloyd in Wauwatosa and laid the cornerstone for a new seminary building. Now that cornerstone is actually at our current seminary. If you ever go there and get the tour, they'll usually point that out to you. It's under the tower area there. And this is the building that was constructed. Today, that's right across the street from St. James. And it's the home for some Catholic charity organization. So we sold it to the Catholics after this. But so we build this brand new seminary. This is a big deal that we have our own permanent seminary building now. I mentioned the folks in Michigan. Not everybody's, I should show a couple of pictures here look at those guys studying. Aren't they just like today, right? Right, Mr. Wagner? You're a couple of weeks into seminary training. Yeah. They do goof around just like today. Guys with the pipes and the hats and all sorts of fun stuff. The folks in Michigan, and you can see Aberhart there is front and center sitting down. They said, we kind of like our seminary. It's been producing some pastors for us. And we're worried that if we start sending our boys over to Wisconsin, they might not want to come back to Michigan. I could make a comment here, but I won't. I won't say anything. There might be some people from Michigan here. No, I'm just kidding. But will they come back? Will we have as much say in things? So they kind of stalled and said, can we keep the seminary part open for a little longer? Can we keep it open for a little longer? And pretty soon it becomes permanent again. And this caused a rift in the Michigan Synod, because some of the pastors in the Michigan Synod said, no, we made a promise. We said we were going to do this. We all voted on it back in 1892. Now we're reneging on that, and so it caused a split in the Michigan Synod for a while until finally their seminary kept shrinking and shrinking, and finally, and then they add, kind of amazing thing, both sides in the dispute, and it got harsh. I mean, guys were withholding offerings from the Synod, and people are excommunicating each other. It was nasty. But in like 1905, each group separately basically published apologies. And then they had a big meeting in Bay City in like 1906, and I guess you could say they hugged it out. They all apologized to each other, said we were wrong. The other guy said, no, we were wrong. Well, I guess we were both wrong. We forgive each other. And okay, now what do we do? And what they ended up doing was they closed the school in 1907 and then reopened it in 1910 as the prep school it was always intended to be. And they said, okay, well, here's what we'll do. We'll let you keep the name seminary. So if you've ever wondered why we have a prep school that's named Michigan Lutheran Seminary, and whenever you hear that, it's a high school. It's not a seminary like we have in Mequon. That's why. There's history always has an answer, right? And so it was kind of an olive branch to the folks in Michigan. We'll let you keep calling it Michigan Lutheran Seminary. And so it continued and continues to this day as a boarding prep school funded by, supported by our synod. Let's see here. Where am I at in my notes? Oh yeah, tragedy in Watertown, 1894. So I got to back up just a tad. The Kaffeemühle on a thunderstorm night in July of 1894 gets struck by lightning, burns. The synod was, there were concerns this could be the end of Northwestern, this could be the end of the synod even. This what are we going to do now? In fact, they actually published, the only time they ever published a separate Gemeindeblatt was for this. Dan?
What? Back up a slide, please.
That one?
My wife lived in the left side of that building when she was a baby. So, it's important to know.
I should have asked how many MLSers we have here. No, you weren't an MLS grad, though. Oh, that's right. You moved to New Ulm then, right? Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. These are the great stories, aren't they? So yeah, this was a big deal. What are we going to do? But I tell you, the synod stepped up. You see this time and again in our synod's history. Even early on, when there were concerns about finances in Watertown, the farmers in the area brought food for the guys, for the students to eat. Here, the synod, kicked in. The synod-wide offering, and boom, within I don't think it was even a year, and this building was built to replace it. Which, of course, being that it was newer, was an improvement. More space, better organized, all that kind of stuff. And so this is going to serve Northwestern for the next probably 50 years or so, I think at least, that it serves. All right. As we move into the 20th century, there's going to be a number of building projects on various synod schools. New Ulm builds things like the music hall, which is still there today. Yes. That dates to like 1905. In 1928, they made a big building construction on it was called, I think then the Wittenberg Collegiate Center or something like that, I think it's called, or is that what it is? Yeah. But a main part of that was built in 1929. So this is kind of an aerial view of the New Ulm campus then as you're moving into kind of the 30s and 40s. So almost all of those buildings are still in use today, I believe. Most of them anyway. But Old Main and Summit Hall is here. The Music Center, the big classroom building, which says something about how well we built the buildings back then, I guess. In Watertown, there were a few building projects. One in particular is worth noting. This building. I note it because it's still in use at Luther Prep today. What's unique about it, it was funded by primarily by a group of Northwestern alumni who were businessmen in Milwaukee. Northwestern did have a business track, still primarily, called Workers, They had a business track, and so there were a number of alumni in the Milwaukee area, and some other wealthy Milwaukee WELS members, Wisconsin Synod members, gave money to build this as the new gymnasium. Today it serves as the auditorium, but Luther Prep is in the midst of a fundraising campaign to build a new music center, and then they turn this back into the gymnasium like it was first intended. What's kind of cool about this, though, in 1912, when it was dedicated, and you can see all the people there for the dedication, the President Ernst, received a telegram from President William Howard Taft congratulating Northwestern and on the building of this new building. And he comments in here, and this telegram is in the archives, and a scan of it's in the book as well, but congratulates them on this new gymnasium. He even talks about how a lot of German Lutherans were very active in the Civil War, that he knew some of them from when he was down in Cincinnati, which he was probably getting Lutheran church bodies confused a little bit because we didn't have any churches in Cincinnati at the time. But one of the reasons he knew about our school, because one of the big donors initially was a guy named George Brumder, who was from Milwaukee. Did I mention him last week? I was trying to remember. No, there was a different group of people I was talking to earlier this week. George Brumder, we'll talk maybe a little bit more about him down the road. He becomes the publisher of the Wisconsin Synod before the publishing house gets started. He knew presidents, including Taft and Roosevelt, knew him personally, had spent time in the White House. So that's probably why Taft knew about this and sent the telegram. But, all right, I've got 10 minutes yet. I think I'm doing okay here. So we're going to talk about next, continue moving into the future here, moving the story along, how does our ministerial education system continue to develop in different ways? There was a report in the mid-20s. Here's a view of Northwestern from the sky there. So here's the auditorium, or the gymnasium. That's the only building on the Watertown campus that is still there today. All the other buildings you see have been torn down and replaced by others, and we'll talk about that maybe down the road a little bit, not in this lesson, but another one. In the mid-1920s, a report, they kind of did a review of education. They called it the committee, and gave a report. And one of the big suggestions in the report was that we should have a prep school in every conference of the synod. Now, that ends up kind of becoming the impetus for area Lutheran high schools. In fact, Winnebago Lutheran Academy will get started in 1925. It also was the impetus for starting a new prep school in 1928. Anybody know where? Well, I guess it's on your notes. Mobridge, South Dakota. The Dakota-Montana District Northwestern Lutheran Academy. Anybody here ever attend there? Or have you heard about it before? Some of our older members probably have heard about it before. So Mobridge was started, the school out there, as a prep school to serve, kind of the western part of the synod, especially the Dakota-Montana District. People in the Dakota-Montana District, those Dakotas, loved this school. They supported it. In the book, I think there's a scan of a Northwestern Lutheran notice that just thanks people for all the stuff they were donating. Food, furniture, all sorts of things. I think basketballs, uniform, all that kind of stuff. The school over time expanded. I think the enrollment at one time got up into the 130s, 40s, something like that. And so we had then, if you're doing the math, we actually had 4 prep schools at one time. So you had Saginaw, Watertown, New Ulm, and the one in Mobridge. Also in 1920s, the early 1920s, it was becoming apparent that the seminary building in Mequon was too small. It was outdated, becoming outdated pretty quickly. They built something in 1893 before they have electricity that much, and now you've got electricity and all that. And it wasn't designed very well as far as logistics. That the dorm rooms, I guess, the bedrooms were on the top floor, and the bathrooms and showers were on the basement. A little awkward. The library, they couldn't add any more books because they were worried the floor might collapse. There were also concerns about the land just wasn't adequate for adding on. They decided we really don't want to add on here. So the Synod started looking for new property. There was one piece of property in Wauwatosa they bought. Land prices went through the roof, and then the Synod says, it wouldn't be good stewardship to build on this kind of expensive land. So they sold it and made a profit. One of the few times in our Synod's history where we actually made money on a land deal. They looked at a place out in Economowoc, that fell through, and finally they found a piece of property, it's overage from 80 acres farm in Thiensville, just up from the village, just up the hill from the village. Ideal location. Had the nature countryside that kind of was especially J.P. Kaler, one of the president of the seminary at the time, thought this would be great for seminary students, but it also had access to the city, because there was an interurban train line that went right down into Thiensville, and the station was just down the hill. Perfect. Guys could walk, you walk 6 blocks, and there you are, get on the interurban train, and then you go to into Milwaukee. That way they could find wives, too. But, now, this was owned by a family who were members at Trinity in Freistadt, Missouri Synod family. They weren't looking to sell, but when they heard what our Synod wanted to do with it, they gave us a deal. $25,000 for this 80 acres. I think that would be a fraction of the tax bill these days. I don't know. And so plans were made and sketches were drawn. This is one of the early sketches. This plan didn't quite work out quite that way. This was initially designed for maybe a different location. But eventually we got in an architect who drew up plans, and in 1928 you have the Cornerstone Lane service. Apparently it was raining that day a little bit maybe. I've always wondered, how did that boy on the right, he got the best seat in the house. I don't know how I don't know whose son he was, but And the man there in the goatee, his head cut off a little bit at the top there, was the Synod president, so reading the dedication right. And then you get the construction going up. The day of dedication, August 1929, a couple months before the Great Depression, before the stock market crash. Seminary was completely paid for when it was built. Cost was like around $400,000 in that dollars of that time. 15,000 people gathered, they estimate. Largest gathering of Wisconsin Synod people at one time in one place. The Milwaukee churches were encouraged to cancel their Sunday morning services that day to encourage everybody to go out there. When you see these pictures, it's hard to see here, but all along the top of the hill here are all the Model A's, Model T's people had driven. You have rudimentary sound systems in there, bullhorn, the big old broadcasting attempts there. Planks and just the benches they use, just fast. I love that picture just to look at it a little bit. We have it down in our seminary basement too, but just a really special day in our Synod's history. And here we are coming up on the centennial anniversary of this campus. Another picture of them on that day. Four professors' homes were built, all of which are still used today. A couple of them are getting some renovation right now, some kitchen and bathroom work, but those are still there today. And it was modeled after, kind of has a little medieval feel, influenced by the Wartburg Castle, which also, oh, by the way, today in church history as well. Today in 1522, Luther's New Testament translation hit the market on this day, and that it was at the Wartburg that he translated the New Testament into German. So there's an aerial view of it as well from that early era. If you notice something, you've ever been to the seminary campus today, you notice something's missing in these pictures. Trees. All the trees that we have pretty much all grown up since 1929. So, all right. Fast forward a little bit further. Talk about another development. In the 1950s, coming out of World War II, schools in the Wisconsin Synod absolutely exploded, and the teacher training was not keeping up. Just as simply wasn't. And starting in 1960, for the decade of the 1960s, the Wisconsin Synod operated a junior college here in Milwaukee. They called it Milwaukee Lutheran Teachers College. Later they changed the name to Wisconsin Lutheran College, which causes no end of confusion these days when you're talking to people about history. It's not the same Wisconsin Lutheran College that is formed, that is in existence today. But it was the campus, they used the campus of Wisco. And in fact, the Synod in early 60s funded an expansion at Wisco. So I think it's the main wing of the original wing of classrooms, on the far south side, the Synod paid for an addition of like 8 classrooms that was funded by the Synod to help house this. Did anybody here do we have any MLTC students? Mary did. My mother went there too. That's how my mom met my dad, actually. Watertown was a lot more convenient to
One wing, on the wing at the lower level had two ends rooms. One room was a study room, and the other room was like the place where the kids, not the high school kids, the college kids could hang out. That's where you could smoke. And I remember one time, now somebody went to Wisconsin Lutheran High School. Do you remember Mr. Found? Who was? I can still remember him coming down to that room and grabbing these 2 high school kids by the back of their collars and marching them down the hall because they had snuck in there to smoke with the college kids.
that Mary said about, so she went to this Milwaukee Lutheran Teachers College. The idea was you went here 2 years and then you went to New Ulm to finish off. And she said that one of the lower rooms was the smoking room for the college students, and some high school kids snuck in there and Mr. Found had to drag them out, yeah. We actually had plans. This is Robert Voss, who was the president of the school, and Siegbert Becker, who was a professor there. They had plans and land and everything, land out in Brookfield, to build this school. Synod never pulled the trigger on it. There were discussions all through the 60s. There was even discussions of starting another prep school in Nebraska at one point in the 60s. They had a whole special convention to review. One of the recommendations was build a whole new college for high school, or for a pastor and teacher in the Milwaukee area. In the end, what they decided to do was build more on the campuses we had. So that basically what happened was this school bought New Ulm time, the New Ulm campus time to expand and build. And so the number of things were built, dorms and the gym and things like that were built at New Ulm. In the 70s, started to realize that, well, first of all, the New Ulm campus was getting crunched with high school and the bigger college. And financial concerns, should we really have 4 prep schools? South Dakota school, Mobridge, was not always producing as many pastors and teachers. And so it was decided in 1978, 79 to close Mobridge, relocate the New Ulm Prep School to Prairie du Chien. We bought a Jesuit school and turned it into Martin Luther Preparatory School. They had to get rid of a lot of Catholic statues and things like that. But we ended up having a prep school that operated there. Did anybody here go to Martin Luther Preparatory School? Oh, you went to the high school when it was in New Ulm. Okay, but anybody here go to the Prairie du Chien campus? Maybe no, but I know Pastor Schwartz's dad taught there, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. One cool story is getting an organ there. Kermit Moldenhauer and Eldon Hirsch actually drove to, got a truck, got a commercial driver's license, went up to Canada to pick up this pipe organ and bring it back down and reassemble it and all this. Again, the story's told in a little vignette in the book. So, see how I'm doing this? So, one last thing to talk about as far as development was the amalgamation in the 1990s, and I'm running out of time. The short story, it was financial again, I think. Can we afford, and enrollments were kind of going down, had been trending down. And I'll say, you look back now and maybe there's concern, should we still have a high school? on the same campus as an all-male college. Maybe that isn't the best thing in the world as we're moving forward into more modern times. What ended up happening was sold the Prairie du Chien campus, merged the high schools or amalgamated them to form Luther Prep, and amalgamated the colleges to form Martin Luther College. And that is what we have still today. 2 prep schools, 1 college, and 1 seminary. So if you're ever wondering, how did we end up with that? Well, now you have the answers. It's all in history. And I think something to keep in mind and remember, this is just I think it's just a jewel of our synod that we have this system. We have consistent training, consistent doctrinal training. We have a consistent supply. We